Hey, how are we? Let's swap the volume around. Here's me. Here's chat. Here's chat. Great. We need music volume adjustment. Okay. Yes, sorry. Part 2 is late last night, XC. It'll be up on YouTube by the time this video is ending. It's uploading now. But that's okay. You don't have to watch them in order. The only thing that, especially if you saw part 1, because part 1 is specifically mechanics. All right. Sorry, XC. Don't worry. I can give you the overview. This is going to be much faster than the last two. I just have to make sure everything looks right. No white lines. I use white lines. Sure. All right. Visual cue for me for editing. Big drink of water. Okay, here we go. This is gonna go much faster than the last two. This is part 3 of the Wilds of Eldraine common and uncommon set review for the purposes of drafting. This set is awesome. We're going to get right into it with the probably best color, certainly the most flexible color in Wilds of Eldraine. So as a quick overview, the red-white mechanic is Celebration. That cares about 2 permanents coming into play. The red-blue archetype is Spells. You play instants and sorceries. Really benefits a lot from adventures. Red-black is Rats. And red-green is sort of bigger, grindier creatures. You can make a very aggressive red-green deck, but you're usually going to lean a little bit more towards rampy mid-range. You can make very aggressive red-black or red-white decks. The red-black decks will often play like combo decks. And then red-blue is very flexible. And the reason red is so strong in this set is because in the other colors we've looked at, the cards that tend to be strong in one of the 4 archetypes are often weak in the others. They'll be, or more commonly, they're strong in 2 of the 4 color pairs. Specifically to red, all of the cards just work everywhere. So we're going to start off with Belligerent of the Ball, and that is a great example of this. As a 3-mana 3/3, it does tend to just be efficient whenever you happen to be able to trigger Celebration. You can cram it into your blue-red deck and make a couple treasures, give something else Menace. It's best in red-white, that's where that 6 is, but you can make it work in red-green. Giving your huge trampling creatures Menace is great. Giving your rats Menace is great. This card is very strong. I gave it a 5, you should pick it pretty high. The ceiling is up at a 6, that's in the Celebration deck. Or it doesn't even need to be in the Celebration deck, you just need ways to turn on Celebration, but you can add those yourself over time. Very cool card, very strong. Up next, we've got the Bellowing Bruiser. So 3 mana to make 2 creatures unable to block is a strong attack. What the Bellowing Bruiser does is, this is not a turn 3 play, but if you have a bunch of creatures out, you can play it on maybe turn 6 along with another 2-drop in order to enable attack, and then play it as a 4/4 with haste in order to enable a second attack. This card is solid in your aggressive decks, but if you're an aggressive deck, you're inherently limited on how many 5-mana creatures you can run. And a 5-mana 4/4 with haste is okay, but there are really strong 5-drops in this. So a Bellowing Bruiser has severe diminishing returns. You probably can only fit 1 or 2 into your deck, but you'll be pretty happy to beat a path once or twice. So don't pick it too high. Grab it on the wheel. If you pick this up last pick, you're fine running 1 or 2 copies of it. All right. Up next, we have Bespoke Battle Garb. This card's kind of bad. Basically, you're paying 2 mana for an equipment that you might not play even if it were 0 to equip. It does trigger itself, so it can come down the turn it's in, but it has strict competition in this set in the form of rolls. Every single color has good ways to power up your tiny creatures, meaning that this is often just the worst way to power up your tiny creatures. Nothing cares specifically about equipment, nothing cares specifically about artifacts. If anything did, you'd be pretty happy with the battle garb. But no, you just will almost always have better options. I gave it a ceiling of 4 because there are red-blue decks with cheap flyers that you can turn this on turn 2 or turn 3, get a very aggressive attacker in, hit them hard and often, and it will be a little better. But in general, this is not a card that you are happy to pick up or play in this form. Boundary Lands Ranger. So I gave the floor of this is a 3 because that's when it's a 2-mana 2/2. The nice thing about this card is you can play it on turn 2 and it will later on maybe off your 4-drop most likely, or even if you just grow the Boundary Lands Ranger itself by giving it +2/+2 or a young hero roll and then a different roll, it will start triggering itself. It's not card advantage, but it is card selection. And we've seen this effect be very strong on 2-drops in the past when it comes in. The problem with Boundary Lands Ranger is on turn 2, if you're digging for a land, if you really need another land, you're not going to be able to dig for one. If you're really digging for an expensive spell, you're not going to be able to pitch a land. But turning it on in the late game so you can rummage away your extra lands is quite strong. It's usually going to play at this ceiling of a 4, but it's not quite as strong as some of the rummagers we've seen in the past. Yeah, I agree with you, XC. It's a solid card, but like it feels like a common. It's good card selection. Oh, and just because I haven't mentioned it yet, I will be answering questions in the chat and talking to people, but only after each card. All right, up next we have Cut In. This is a solid and pretty cool removal spell. So 4 mana, deal 4, kills 93% of all unbuffed creatures at common and uncommon in the format, which is a lot. But being sorcery speed hurts a little. So like if this were an instant that dealt 4, this would be a 6 or a 7. But 4 mana, deal 4 to clear a blocker and grow one of your creatures is really nice. And lots of red cards wield the young hero role very effectively. I like this card. It's just awkward in that the 4 slot tends to not. This is a card you play after your other creatures. So like the young hero roll is pretty good. Like if you go 2-drop, 3-drop, kill a creature, young hero, your 1-drop or your 2-drop starts to grow, very strong. It is good red removal, and there's a lot of really good red removal. It's also very easy to splash. Solid all around. Hey Ben, good to see ya. Dragon Mantle up next. So this is one of the Fable Collection cards. Enchanting Tales, Fable Tales, Enchanting Tales. Enchanting Tales, well, it's Enchanting Tales. All right. This card is really good in this set because an enchantment, we've seen lots of 2-mana enchantments that draw a card when they come into play that are almost good enough. 1-mana enchantment that draws a card when it comes into play is great. You have to be a little bit careful because if your opponent kills the target of Dragon Mantle in response, then you don't get to draw the card. But since this is an old card, it's not an enchant creature you control. So you can enchant your opponent's creature when you need to. I mean, I'm sure we'll see a few scenarios where you play Dragon Mantle on your opponent's creature, make it a little bit bigger, and then kill it with a different spell. You don't want to have to do that, but the flexibility is nice. It also is a lot of extra damage and combos with a lot of little cards. Like this is you'll see people play this in most of their decks as good with red-green because red-green has a lot of enchantment synergies and cards that care about having 4 power. It's good in red-blue because you can put it on a flyer. It's good in mono-red because you can put it on a ginger brute. And you're always happy with a 1-mana aura. There's not a lot of 1-mana auras that aren't also tokens. Pick this one high if you're aggressive red, and much later if you're non-aggressive red. But you'll usually be pretty happy with the Dragon Mantle. They really nailed the Enchanting Tales in red. I think they nailed them at uncommon in every single color. I love them. Like the ones they picked are really kind of perfect. All right, up next we have the Edgewall pack. 4-mana 3/3 that makes a rat. So we've seen this effect be really powerful in the past because 4-mana 3/3 with a keyword ability that makes a chump blocker is really good. A 4-mana 3/3 that makes a creature that is not a chump blocker is a little bit worse, but the rat deck is pretty strong. So this card is going to be solid everywhere. There are better 4-drops, but this one is a good one. And spreading your 4-mana 4/4 across 2 bodies is nice. If your opponent is at 1 life, it takes 3 blockers to block this Edgewall pack. It's also adorable. Like, it's a rat and 4 dogs. It's a 4/4. It's a 4-mana 3 that makes a nice bargain creature. This is solid, playable in red, and it's less strong in the aggro decks, but most things that cost 4 or more mana are. I like this one a lot. Embereth Veteran, 1 mana 2/1 is solid. A 1 mana, like, you need to be fairly aggressive. It's a little bit awkward in that this is one of the best wielders of the young hero role, but you need another one to make a young hero role. However, it is one of the ways that enables celebration on a single card, and it's great in the celebration deck because this is instant speed. So like you can block with it and then put a young hero roll on something else. And if you have something that is bigger, not that triggers, but is bigger while celebration is active, you can activate this to turn on celebration at instant speed, which is just a little more value than you'd normally expect on a 1-drop. Like you saw me give the 1 mana 2/1 in white on the first day a 2. Even though it has an adventure, this is just significantly better than that uncommon because it plays well with celebration, it plays well with auras, it plays well with bargain. Plus, it's very aggressive. This is what you want your 1 mana 2/1 to look like. So I gave it a 3 with a ceiling of 5, but it's usually going to play somewhere in the middle. Flick a Coin. This is probably the card in red that I re-evaluated most often because it just is so crazy to me that this deal 1 damage for 3 mana is a higher rating than deal 4 damage for 4 mana. But this card does everything you want. This is an instant that ramps, that provides bargain fodder, that cycles, that kills a significant number of creatures in the set, that fixes your colors, that recurs. There's a lot of ways to pick up Flick a Coin. Like, so cool. Like, how did they manage to make this card so good? It's 3, deal 1 damage, create a treasure, draw a card, 3 very small effects. You can get 3 cards out of this card. Like, you can make this card a 3-for-1. It looks pretty good and plays even better. Yeah, this card is, if there's one card that can convince you to take higher in this set than you would otherwise, it is Flick a Coin. It does have, so I don't even want to say, like, a lot of these cards that I say this card is pretty good, I'll also tell you to be careful about how many of them you take. But like, you can play 4 Flick a Coins because you can cycle them. It just depends on what else your curve is. It also makes a lot of the cards that I've talked about before that were kind of weak, like the fairy. So it's really good against, it's one of the reasons that the 2/1 fairy that reduces the cost of spells is bad. But like, if you have a bunch of Flick a Coins, then you can take the weak cards that wheel and get more out of them. Because if you have 4 Flick a Coins and 2 of the fairies that reduce the cost of instants and sorceries, you'll get a lot more out of it. Just solid all around. Also, I love the little story it tells. You're just a little expert flicking a coin and bouncing it in the right spot. So yeah, that floor of a 4 is if you don't have a specific purpose for it, but it's pretty easy to have a specific purpose for it, whether that's bargain or triggering celebration at instant speed, or recurring it as an instant or sorcery, or ramping into your 5 mana spell because 5 mana spells matter in red-green a turn faster. Plus, you can hold it up alongside counter spells, alongside divinations, alongside other removal spells. So good. All right, Frantic Firebolt. This card is so on turn 3, often 2 damage will be enough. You'll need to kill something that takes 2 damage. On turn 5, this will probably deal 3 or 4 damage at instant speed. It's not the best red removal spell, which speaks to how good the red removal is, but a cheapish burn spell that kills most things on turn 3, which scales into the late game, is very strong. And the only thing that really stops it cold is Soul Guide Lantern, which is an uncommon and artifact, which is a strong reason to sideboard Soul Guide Lantern in your sealed event, or main deck it if you're short on playables. But like, generally speaking, Soul Guide Lantern is a good sideboard card against the blue-red spells deck because of cards like Frantic Firebolt. Be prepared to side your Frantic Firebolts out if you think your opponent has a lot of Soul Guide Lanterns or not a lot of creatures that it'll kill. But like, 4 damage kills most of the creatures in this set. So if you have 2 instants and sorceries, counting cards that are adventures is really important because The cards that only count instant and sorceries in this deck are much weaker than the cards that count instant sorceries and cards with adventures, because you're usually inherently limited on how many instants and sorceries you can run in your deck. You have to have a certain number of creatures. But if all those creatures have adventures, then Frantic Firebolt gets strong fast. And if you get this up to 5 damage, it kills just about everything. All right, up next we have 9 Crescendo. This card, you're just limited on how many copies of this card you can run. However, if you get to 6 mana, casting 2 9 Crescendos is so funny. Like, you can have 5 rats in play 2 9 Crescendos, and if your opponent blocks them all, you'll have 10 rats in play. This card is specifically best in the rats deck. There are other token generators and other token decks, but this one is best in the rat deck. It's pretty weak in general, and you don't usually want more than 1 copy, so don't pick it too high. But if you get one on the wheel or last pick, you won't be too upset to run it. Just because it's tough to get more than 1 card out of value of this. But if you're paying 3 mana to deal 4 damage and make 2 rats, like most commonly with these inspired charges, +2/+0 or +2/+1 or +3/+3 at instant speed, you're using them to push through a little bit of damage and turn one of your creatures that was just dying into a trade. So if this is 3 mana, deal 3, trade 1 creature, it's okay. But if you can trade two creatures and make a rat or deal 6 extra damage, it's a lot better. And you'll steal wins with this. I am going to do my 100 trophies in a bit, and I can almost guarantee there will be enough card decks running 9 Crescendo for me to put the 9 Crescendo math into the 100 trophies takeaways. All right, up next, we've got Grabby Giant. This card is really cool. I had to read it a few times. The modes on it are very interesting. So if you have a 4-mana 4/3 reach is pretty good in this format because it blocks all the 1/1 and 2/1 and 2/3 and 1/3 fairies as a 4-mana 4/3 with reach. It also, just having the ability to turn your treasures into or extra lands into fresh cards is always pretty nice. This is a 4-mana 4/3, but if this is your only card in hand, then you can turn to make a treasure and then sack the treasure to play it on turn 3. And that's not ideal, but it's a good emergency case because sometimes in Magic you have to mulligan to a 5-card hand and you will be missing points on your curve. The Grabby Giant fills out your curve pretty nicely. And if you don't have to do it, then maybe turn 5, maybe turn 6, you draw it off the top and you make a treasure and play a 4/3 and then you get to eat it. Or you just use a treasure to fix somewhere else. Solid all around. Even just triggering Celebration at instant speed or making bargain fodder at instant speed with That's Mine is solid. So I gave it a 4, which is kind of stable territory, but you're not always going to play every copy. With a ceiling of 5, and that's if you need the treasure actively. Hey Alex, how's it going? I'm just saying hi and answering questions between cards. Good to see ya. We are about a third of the way through. We're closer to half of the way through red cards, and then we will do green cards, and then it's early access. Okay, up next, Grand Ball Guest, another staple red card. This is the card you want the most in the Celebration deck. I actually may end up raising the ceiling to a 6 based on how good the other 2-drops turn out to be in the Celebration deck. Because a 2-mana 3/3 trample is really good. And this card, short of the actually dealing damage to your opponent's life total, attacks like a 2-mana 3/3 trample. Because if I play a 1-mana 2/1 on turn 3 and then attack my Grand Ball Guest into your Grand Ball Guest, will you block with your Grand Ball Guest? And the answer is no, because there are too many cards that make a treasure or a rat or a roll at instant speed and turn this into a 3/3. So even if this card is not actively a 3/3 on the attack, if you have mana up, it attacks like a 3/3 because your opponent has to block it like it's not a triggered ability on attack like Ash Party Crasher. It is a static ability that is on as long as 2 permanents have entered under your control. So it's got a threat of activation, but a very strange one that your opponent will always have to treat like it's easy for you to turn on. All right, just Premier, like if you're the Celebration deck, pick it pretty high. Pick it at that 5. If you're not the Celebration deck, it's a fine 2-drop that holds the ground. It's gonna be a 3 for you. Harried Spear Guard. I took a lot of revisions on this card. There are not a lot Excuse me. So there are not a lot of good ways to get extra value out of the 1/1. So we've seen like Doom's Traveler effects be very strong. Usually they'll make a 1/1 flyer or a 1/1 lifelink or even just a 1/1 that blocks a second time. If this makes a 1/1 that blocks a second time, then it plays as well on defense as offense. Raging Goblin that dies into a body is solid, but in this set, you can't play this card without context. Don't play the Spear Guard without knowing specifically how you're going to use the rat or make this card better. Because the other problem with the Spear Guard is sometimes your opponent will figure out you're the rat deck and just not block the Spear Guard. They will just take 1 damage in order to keep you from having the rat. Like if you have the black-red signpost uncommon that gives your rats Death Touch, they're not going to let the Spear Guard die into a rat. They're just going to take the damage. So this card is better with ways to sacrifice it, which there aren't that many in this set, because you can't bargain away the Spear Guard. It's not good on its own, but it becomes playable. So like you may notice that I usually do a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 4 with a high effort value. This is a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 4 with a medium effort value. Because it is harder to turn this card. You have to be able to turn this card into something relevant, but it is not as hard to turn it into something relevant as some of the other 2s that I've given out. Up next, we've got Hearth Elemental. This card is really strong. It's so strong. So if you draw this card off the top of your deck in the late game, then it's 2 mana, draw 2 cards, then play a 4/5 for 1 mana. So it's 3 mana for a 4/5 that drew you 2 cards. If you are just really aggressive, then that's fantastic. You will play this for 1 mana a startling amount of the time. But even if you don't, if you're just playing a normal game of Magic, then you're going to play this for 4 mana, even if you don't Stoke Genius, and you'll have a 4 mana 4/5. So the modes and that's a 5. The modes on this are all pretty good, and the success case of being draw 2 cards on a 4/5 for 3 mana, it wins the game. Very strong. Hey, Ben. Yeah, card's really good. This design is so good because like it's really in a pinch. You'll have situations where you do just discard 4 cards and then play it for 1 mana on turn 3 and win the game that way. And it's going to be really funny when you do, but don't do it too often. All right. Emo Dane's Recruiter. Is this best red card? This is up there for best red card. There are a few that are similar. You do have to be able to play the train troops to play this card. Like you don't have to do it every time, but you have to have the option for this card to be so strong. But without the option, if it's just a 3 mana 3/2 with haste that pumps the rest of your team, that's still fine. Like I should lower the floor to a 4 because a 3 mana 3/2 with haste that pumps the rest of your team is a 4 if you have no other team. Right, guides on adventure aren't in your hand. That's exactly right, Ben. So it's usually going to play near that ceiling of a 7. If you play this on turn 5, make 2 2/2s, then on turn 6, you can play another 3-drop or a 2-drop if you don't have lands, and the Imidane's Recruiter, and then Imidane's Recruiter is an extra 3, 4, 5, 6 damage that turn. It enables attacks that you wouldn't have had. 3 bodies on 1 card is so powerful in this set because there aren't a lot. There's, I think, 2 sweepers at rare, but none at common or uncommon. There's no pyroclasm effects. A lot of value for 1 card. All of these multicolored Avengers creatures are just so powerful. You do want to make sure that you have access to white mana summon in your deck. You don't necessarily have to be a red-white deck, but like a Prophetic Prism or this 2/1 Scarecrow or Crystal Grotto or 2, like you need a few white sources in order to train the troops. But some games you'll just get to 8 mana and you'll put out 9 haste power in 1 turn and win the game. A very, very powerful adventure. You can play it as just a creature XC. So when we evaluate the adventure cards, some of them we will evaluate each half separately because each half is strong enough. Some of them, like this Grabby Giant, this card would not be good without both halves because a 4 mana 4/3 reach is a little bit understated and 2 mana for a treasure is a little bit understated. But together it makes a whole pretty good card. The best adventures, so the main difference in adventures is the common cards tend to require both halves for it to be playable, and the uncommon cards tend to be good on both halves. Or use treasure, exactly, Ben. But adventures are like in general, XC change how the whole set plays, because like this is just 2 cards. They're not even that weak. Like this is usually a 4 mana effect, and this is usually a 3 mana effect. So this front half, this 3 mana 3/2 with haste that pumps your team, that is just a good enough card on its own, which means that 5 mana make 2 knights is gravy. It's just extra bonus value. So what you see in adventure sets is the card advantage tends to come from adventures, and the aggressive decks try to get in underneath the adventures, because when your opponent is playing a lot of adventures, their cards are just 2-for-1s. There are fewer adventures in this set than there were in Eldraine, but they tend to be a little stronger on the uncommons and a little weaker on the commons. It's such a good mechanic. Adventures are a very good mechanic. No, there's no drawback, except for there are cards that specifically hate on adventures. But yeah, XC, the cards that are adventures that are just 2 good cards, first pick those. This is the first pick. This is the 7. Like mostly it's rares that get 7s. Impact Tremors, so cool. I'm so glad to see this card. The floor of this card is a 2. It's a little awkward because it has to come in before your it has to come in before the creatures, which means you want it on turn 2, except for if you're an aggressive deck, you may remember that you want your 2 mana creatures on turn 2. You want to be attacking. So it's a tough it's a pretty tough card to play with, but if you build around it, like there are creatures that blink, there are creatures that you can pick up, it's a good way to grind out those last few points of damage. So when you're building your deck with Impact Tremors, and this means when you take it too, you need to look at how much damage you're expecting to deal over the course of the game with the Impact Tremors. How much like if you can get this to be a 2 mana deal 5, it's really pretty strong. If it's going to be a 2 mana deal 3, you don't really want it. And if it's not going to do anything when you draw it off the top of your deck in the late game, you don't. But lots of cards like Imidane's Recruiter that make 3 bodies with 1 card, or 2 bodies with 1 card maybe. We'll talk more. We'll get to more creatures that make multiple bodies with 1 card, and the Impact Tremors goes up a lot in value. Up next, we've got Kindled Heroism. It's not that good in this set. The 1 mana tricks are very, very powerful in this set. And Kindled Heroism doesn't add up. Kindled Heroism does not defeat any of the other 1 mana tricks in this set in a head-to-head battle, and there's not quite enough creatures where this makes a difference in a combat. Sometimes you will have to play Kindled Heroism, usually when you don't have enough removal. This card does a good job of being bad removal. The Scry one is nice, but like generally speaking, avoid playing with the Kindled Heroism. It's at that ceiling of a 3 when you really don't have other effects. There are a few cards that care about having a critical mass of cheap spells, and you can play it in those decks. Generally speaking, avoid it. Corvald and the Noble Thief. This card is very cool. It is not very good. So 4 mana to make a treasure is a very expensive way to trigger Celebration with 1 card. It does enable Celebration for 2 turns, and it almost draws you 3 cards. And if it's going to draw you actual 3 cards, then it's solid. The thing is, this will only ever draw you 3 cards in your specific mirror, because all you have to work with are 2 treasure tokens, and most of the red decks want to be fairly aggressive, and the red decks that don't want to be that aggressive want to run spells. So if you have like a red-green mid-range deck where you're playing against a red-green mid-range deck, then it's fine. But it's so hard to do all the things. So Corvald and the Noble Thief is good if you need a saga, like if you care about enchantments, but you need to be using you can't use the treasures as bargain fodder because you need the treasures to cast your opponent's spells when you draw them. Because you only have the 1 turn. It's not until end of next turn, like some of these effects we've seen. So it is a mirror card. If you and your opponent are on the same colors, go ahead and side it in, because then it's make 2 treasures, draw 3 cards. But in all of those situations, you really want to avoid it. And if you're an aggressive deck, you don't want to take your turn 4 off to do something that draws cards. even though it refunds 2 of the mana. Yeah, it has a place, but don't take it very high. Like even these treasure tokens, if you need it for fixing a ramp, there are better ways to do that in red. Merry Bards. So this is a cool card. We've seen a few other 3/2s that make a young hero roll when they die, or that make a young hero roll for a bonus. There are better 3-drops in red, but this is not a bad one. The nice thing about Merry Bards is you can put the young hero, it's not another target creature. You can put the young hero roll on the Merry Bards itself, meaning that the modal option of Merry Bards makes it playable compared to some of the other 3/2s we've seen. So being able to play this on turn 3 as a 3/2 attacker when you don't have other 3-drops in your aggressive deck is not ideal, but you'll keep hands where you have a very strong 2-drop, a very strong 4-drop, and a Merry Bards. But Merry Bards can also be a 4-drop, where that is a 3/2 that puts the young hero roll on another creature. So being able to kick it for 1 mana in order to automatically trigger Celebration means that it's pretty strong in the Celebration deck, and not in a lot of other places, but there are enough common and uncommon cards that care about the young hero rolls that you can pick it up and play it like a 4 if you have a pile of Ginger Brutes or a pile of Fairies. Generally speaking, I love that these are just bards who inspire someone, even if it's themselves. They are always an inspiration. Yeah, so don't take it too high, but don't be upset if you have to play it. Minecart Daredevil. So we saw, this is a throwback. There was a 3/1 for 2 mana in the original Eldraine, which was red to give a creature +2/+0. 2 mana to give a creature +2/+1 is slightly worse because often you will still just be trading with the other creature. But the 1 extra toughness will let you occasionally win a combat, which means you will occasionally be able to get a whole card out of the adventure rather than just turning your 2/1 into a 4/1 to trade up. This card is another one that I revised a few times, and that's because enough cards care about you having 4 power on turn 3 that you're still happy to play with it. It has the same caveats as other adventures. Don't play it when you think your opponent's going to kill your creature in response. Be careful with how you play adventures in general. But the 4 power up for 3 mana is relevant to enough cards that I'm not too upset to take this card. And I will usually get to trade up twice. So if you're aggressive, you need enough removals to attack as your 4/2. But if you're a mid-range deck, then this will usually let your small creature survive win a combat, and then trade up with a 3/3. So usually this is going to be worth the 2 cards that you want from your adventure. Monstrous Rage. Card is really good. It looks good and it plays better. So this is 1 red mana to give a creature +3/+1 and trample, and the +1/+1 stays for the whole time. So if the +1 toughness is enough to win a combat. Lots of things in red and green care actively about having a monster roll. It triggers Celebration at instant speed, and it's a 1 mana trick. It's take it pretty high in your aggressive decks and play it in your mid-range decks when you need trample. Solid card. Very good trick. So Picnic Ruiner. This card's just good. So there are a lot of ways, like you can play this on turn 2 as just a 2 mana 2/2, and then give it +2/+2 and attack. And it'll be an 8 power attacker on turn 3. If you play Stolen Goodies and pump up the rest of your team, then you will most likely have a 4/4 when you play it the turn after. The thing about distributing +1/+1 counters is that it turns on attacks with as many as 3 creatures. Like, whatever the board state is, 3 +1/+1 counters will swing things in your favor enough to give you a strong attack. That effect is worth a whole card for sure. And then a 2 mana 2/2 with Double Strike is just strong, and it's strong in general because of how good the 1 mana tricks are. So, like, if you play a Monstrous Rage on this, then you attack with a 10 power Trampler on the Picnic Ruiner. This is a little more aggressively leaning than some of the other split color adventure cards we've seen, but just so powerful. All right, up next we have Raid Bombardment. This one is easier to work with than the Impact Trip, even though it's an extra mana, because you can play Raid Bombardment after you play all the creatures. You do have to build around it to a certain extent, but it's great in the Rats deck and it's good in the Celebration deck, especially because a lot of these Celebration cards will trigger on attack, so you can deal the damage and then grow the creature. Solid in general, but it's a build around. It's not a free include. So I gave it a 5, but it's going to play at a 3 if you're actually going to be than a 3. It's going to be lower than a 3 if you are not building around it. But that ceiling of a 7, there are decks where this will win the game because you deal the damage before your opponent gets a chance to block. So if you have 5 1/1s and your opponent has 2 2/2s, like if you have 5 1/1 rats and your opponent just has 2 2/2s or a 2/2 and a 5/5, you normally don't make that attack. But if you attack your 5 rats into their 2 blockers, then you deal 5 and they take 3, and that's 8 damage. And then they take another 3 on the next attack, even if they have play a 3rd blocker. So like punching damage through with the raid bombardment is a solid way for a lot of these low to the ground decks to win the game. Up next, we have Ratcatcher Trainee. This is the best non-removal common. A 2-mana, there are very few creatures with First Strike, and First Strike is very powerful in this set. There are a lot of 3/2s and 2/1s, and Ratcatcher Trainee attacks through them all. This is a single card that at instant speed enables... Oh, thank you, Hatter. This is a single card that at instant speed enables all the Celebration decks and gives you 2 cards worth of bargain fodder in addition to being a 2/1 First Strike. Like a 5-mana 2/1 that makes 2/1/1s is a card I would play in this set, and is just a ruthlessly efficient way to make rats. Solid all around. Play it, take it high in any of the red decks. This is the bridge between Celebration, because it's the 3-mana 2/3 that triggers Celebration by itself, and red green ramp. Makes a treasure. Not a ton to say. Like, it makes a bargain fodder, it makes a treasure, it triggers Celebration, it ramps, it blocks really well. 2/3 is a good stat line in this set as long as you are getting a whole card's worth of value. Like, a 3-mana 2/3 that makes a treasure is better in this set than a 3-mana 3/2 that makes a treasure. So I gave it a 4. It's not terribly hard to get full value out of this, but you do want to think about how you're getting full value out of this. Skewer Slinger. This card is a ruthlessly efficient blocker in red. You don't want blockers in red, but sometimes you will have late game red cards and bombs that make you want to hold the ground well, and this holds the ground and the air. So like, this is not a card you want in most red decks, but there are rares that you want to build around where you will want the Skewer Slinger. I like this one. Yeah, so don't take it high. You need your red drop, you need your 2 drops to be relatively aggressive. It does trade with their 3/2s, but like, that's not a great thing when their 3/2s also make some when their 3/2s also make value when they come into play or die. So the nice thing about Skewer Slinger is there are decks, so like if your opponent is on a black deck with 3 monstrosities and that's their early game, then you can bring in the Skewer Slingers, which attack and block through the monstrosity. But it's a bad attacker. You want this to play defense, and you don't want to take it unless you have a reason to need the defense, which is tough in red. Stone Splitter Bolt. Just an efficient red spell. Like, deal X damage is playable without being strong. The ability to bargain it so you can pay 3 mana to deal 4 is good enough to make this a desirable removal spell. But if you want to take it as a high removal spell, as a strong removal spell, then do make sure you can bargain it. It's not terribly difficult to when you can play something at instant speed, bargaining is easy. If it's sorcery speed, bargaining is hard. But it does tend to kill anything when you really need to kill something, and it takes out cheap flyers when you really need to kill a cheap flyer. Efficient removal, red has really good removal in this. Tattered Ratter. So this card in the rat deck, this card is nuts. Like, if you are a dedicated rat deck with 5 rats out on turn 6 and you drop the ratter, they can't block the rats anymore, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. But you don't need a ton of rats for this card to be good. It's playable with 1 other rat. If you are just building your red deck, you're probably going to have like 3 to 5 rat makers, and then the card's still just a fine 2-drop. If it makes a few rats harder to block, you're happy. It is a little awkward in that I'm gonna drop this a little bit. Yeah, because if you attack with 4 rats, your opponent can kill the Tattered Ratter and then block all the rats, and that can be backbreaking, which means it doesn't enable quite as many attacks as you want it to. But for a 2-drop, I'm still happy to play it, even if I don't have a ton of rats. I'm really excited to draft the rat deck. Torch the Tower. Best bargain spell? Possibly the best bargain spell. 1 mana, deal 3 at instant speed. Like, having a cheap bargain spell just so raises all of the different ways that you can use it. Like, you can use a turn 3 Saga. You can put the 3rd chapter on the stack, bargain it away. Often, you won't be able to play an additional spell there, but you can with Torch the Tower. And there are ways to copy spells. We talked earlier about how many cards care about having cheap red and blue spells just at 1 or 2 mana. This is premier red removal. Take it really high. There's not a lot of red cards you'll take over towards the tower. Even if you can't bargain it at all, 1 mana, deal 2, exile the creature at instant speed is great in this set. Yeah, this is just premier in this set. Like, that floor of a 4 is 1 mana, deal 2, exile it. That it's good, better in some sets than others. All right, Twisted Fealty. So we had one other threaten. I think I have it. Oh, yep, Apple. All right, so Ares Tempting Apple. The difference between Ares Tempting Apple and Twisted Fealty is 1 whole mana and a Wicked Roll. So like, Ares Tempting Apple is a lot tougher to play at 4 mana, but it's still a good card if you can have the sack outlets. This is still a good card if you have the sack outlets, but it's better than the Apple if you don't have the sack outlets, as long as your deck is aggressive enough, because you get to take out a blocker, attack with their creature, and make a Wicked Roll to trigger your celebration. The Wicked Roll, don't underestimate. Don't underestimate it. Also, you can take if your opponent has a roll on their creature, you can Twisted Fealty that creature. You control the creature, but they still control the roll, which means that they can have a Young Hero roll on it, and you can put a Wicked Roll on it without taking out the Young Hero roll. So like, it's just a very good aggressive. So that floor of a 2 is like, this is a good aggressive card even without the sack outlets. But if you have the sack outlets, it gets a lot better. This is one of the better threatens we've seen. Up next, Two-Headed Hunter. Not a ton to say. You will get 2 cards worth of value out of this. 5 mana, 5/4 Menace, pretty good. 2 mana, Double Strike, pretty good. Lots of cards, get a lot out of Double Strike. Also, efficient 5 mana creatures. So green and blue care about having creatures with mana value 5 or more enter the battlefield or already in play, and creatures with power 4 or more in play already. So having your efficient 5-drops, which already did something earlier in the game, trigger all those things, it's just good. It's really easy to get this card to play at a ceiling of 6, which is 2 whole cards, both of which are threatening. Unruly Catapult, this one we're going to revisit, but it's an 0/4 blocker, pretty good at blocking. The red-blue deck that wants to stall out and chain all their cantrips and into cheap removal wants this card badly, and it will win them the game. We're going to give it a revisit. So the floor of a 2 is if you don't have a lot of spells. The ceiling of a 6 is if you do. Pretty straightforward. Like this card a lot, and I'm going to... It might be weak in a lot of decks. Like, you can't take it for free, but if you're the blue-red spells deck, it's very good in that. And if you just are a deck with a lot of adventures, you're still pretty happy to play the Catapult. Just be a little wary in, like, red-green, where you need to be able to fight other creatures, or red-white, where you're putting auras on things, because this doesn't wield the auras. Hey, Kuro! We're just at the end of red, and then we're going to get into green. How you doing today? It's okay. Kuro, I'm recording this. You should do class if you need to do class. Up next, Witch's Mark. So, Tormenting Voice is a card that we've seen in a lot of the sets with a Spells Matter theme. Which Tormenting Voice is 2 mana, discard a card, draw 2 cards. But it's always been an additional cost on Tormenting Voice. This is the best version of Tormenting Voice we've seen in a long time, because first of all, it's a May, which means that you can play this card. Like, the problem with Tormenting Voice, not a problem, but one aspect of Tormenting Voice is you need to hold a card in your hand if Tormenting Voice is anywhere in your deck, because the risk of drawing a Tormenting Voice off the top of your library without having a card to discard it and having it just be a dead card is huge. It's a huge problem if that happens. Well, Witch's Mark, you can just cast. You don't have to discard it as a card cost. Also, if your opponent counters your Witch's Mark, you don't have to discard a card, which you would for Tormenting Voice. So 2 mana, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create a Wicked Roll. So this is good in your spells deck, this is good in your Enchantress's deck, this is good in your Celebration deck. It's bad in the red-green deck, but in the red-green deck, you might be wanting to run more lands anyway. So I really like having access to the Witch's Mark in just about any red deck. It's got diminishing returns, you can't have too many, but it's also not great on turn 2 unless you have a 1-drop, but this card does so much more than we've ever seen a Tormenting Voice do. All right, last red card is Witchstalker Frenzy. This kills 97% of the creatures in the set for often just 1 mana. And what we've seen on the cards like this in the past is just being a sorcery. But since this is an instant, you can play this on your turn, after you attack with 3 creatures, or after your opponent attacks with 3 creatures. And 1 mana destroy target creature is pretty good. I am going to lower this to a 6. Yeah, I like that, because that's just hard for destroy target creature, even if it's just 1 mana, to be higher than a 6. We're gonna revisit this because it kills a lot of stuff, but you're kind of, yeah, you do have to time it. But 1 mana, just kill it, is good in every deck. You should take this pretty high in any red deck. No, this is a 7. This is just so efficient. Very efficient removal spell. Like, you will always play this card in red, period. All right, so that is it for the red cards. I'm going to be right back and we'll talk about the green cards. I just need to go refill my water because I have a cup today instead of a bottle. Oh, my mouth is a little messed up. Hang on. Hi. How's... Much shorter today? What happened? How's that? No. All right, be right back. We'll cover green really quick, and then we'll get into early access. Oh, I can pull this up while we do that. You want to see what things look like here. You do have to buy the cosmetics. All right, be right back. So sorry for the delay. I gotta remember to cut that out. Yeah, but here's the early access screen. They give you 500,000 gems and all sorts of stuff. But for now, excuse me, I'm back. All right into green. Let's go. It was. I was getting water and I spilled the water and took my time. I'm glad you're here, Night Dark. I thought you'd be working today. That's why one of the reasons that I wanted to make my stream long enough that everyone could come by. All right, here we go. Up first, we have Agatha's Champion. So this is a card that you really do want to be able to bargain. Compared to a lot, like a 5-mana 4/4 that bites a creature and triggers all of, like this triggers everything that green wants to do, as long as you have something to bargain away. So it's not free, but it is very good. It triggers all your 4 power matters. It triggers all of your CMC 5 matters, and it kills a creature on a 4/4 trample, solid body all around. They get pretty high, but if you pick an Agatha's Champion early, keep extra track of what rolls you have, what treasures you have. You do have to be able to bargain to make this card strong. Yeah, if you're sacrificing something real, it's a 3 or a 4. Could probably lower the floor, but it's usually going to be a 4 because you'll usually have something to bargain. If you have nothing in play on turn 5 against your opponent who has something that needs to be killed, this card will not save you. But otherwise, it's very good. Beanstalk Worm. This card I've reevaluated a few times. It's just a little awkward in how it blocks. It doesn't match up well against a lot of other creatures, but it's an adventure creature that triggers your things. So like you want your big expensive creatures to have adventures that are cheaper on the front end. So being able to play this on turn 2 to play an additional land and then play your 4-drop early on is nice, but it's just going to be filler. It is the filler version for a lot of different decks though, so keep an eye out for it later on in the draft if you don't have quite enough big creatures, or if you don't have quite enough ramp, or if you don't have quite enough adventures. The 5/4 reach is relevant in this set. Being able to block all the opposing fairies is nice, but overall this is the weakest version of the card in this slot. Hey Eric, how's it going? Bestial Bloodline. This card is pretty cool. You really don't want more than one in your deck, but it's solid because you can play this on turn 2 on your 2/2 and grow it. It combos with lots of little cards. So like if you have a Gingerbread on turn 1 and then turn 2, you can play a Bestial Bloodline, attack for 3 for a while, and then give it unblockable. It's okay if your opponent just kills the Gingerbread because you can pick it up a little bit later. It's also a card you can bargain away and then pick up again. It is expensive, but 2 mana for +2/+2 is nice. If you have a way to sacrifice enchantments, then you can trigger all of your enchantment death synergies. Like this card is not great in a vacuum, but it has enough interactions and points where it's just strong in this format, in this set, that you're not too happy about running the first copy and maybe the second copy in some decks. So I gave it a 4, but the second copy is usually going to be a 3, and you really want to build around it. Try and find the deck where it slots in. But I think it's pretty good. There's a lot of 2-drops that are like, if you have a creature with power 4, there's 2 mana 2/2s. Like there's a 2 mana 2/3 with Defender that attacks if you have a creature with power 4 or greater. You can just put Bestial Bloodline on that creature to attack with it. There's also a 2/2 in red that if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, it has double strike, and you can put this on that creature and attack for 8. It's a combo card, but it's a good combo card. Brave the Wilds. This is, don't worry about the bargain. That is just extra gravy for late in the game if you draw this off the top of your deck. What you care about is searching for the basic land card. So Brave the Wilds replaces the 17th land in a lot of situations. I wouldn't run too many of them. So like I'd run 2 copies of this and 16 lands instead of 17 lands in most of my green deck. Just because it's like commune with the spirits in Neon Dynasty or mini parties in the last set. Like you can replace a fair number of your lands with it, but not all of them. And being able to turn a treasure into a 3/3 later on is nice. It's not instant speed. So you don't get to like make a sudden blocker, but it's relevant. Like you'll usually in green end up turning your extra food into a 3. Or maybe this bestial bloodline into a 3/3. Because it costs a land. It's not a free 3/3. So most often this is going to be searchable land. I'm usually happy to play the first and second copies. Commune with Nature. It is too easy to build a deck where this card misses, and you only want this card if you also care about spells. So I actually like it quite a bit in green-blue, but there are better cards in green-blue. It has the same problem as Sleight of Hand in just blue, except for you can miss. It's like Sleight of Hand that you can miss. So don't play this usually. The exception would be in decks that care about spells and decks with their deck has to both care about spells and have very powerful hits. So like if you have some strong rare blue and green creatures in your blue-green deck, you can play Commune with Nature. But do not take it highly and do not play it by default. There are cards that you can build around or that are strong enough to justify digging through your whole deck. But you have to have the rares first. Curse of the Werefox. I am such a sucker for these make a roll, destroy target creature, and monster rolls is one of the better ones. Like this is 3 mana, give a creature +1/+1, fight a creature. So it's just efficient. You do have to have a creature in play, but chances are you will have a target for this. And the monster roll is a relevant card in the green deck. It lets you, is that all the things we've been talking about? You can bargain it, it triggers celebration, and there's a lot of good creatures to gain trample. Hey, Black Sheepo. I've been great. Not today, maybe later. We are in the middle of our set review, Black Sheep. All right, up next we have Ferocious Werefox. This is part of the cycle of Adventure, make a roll, and Efficient Body. A 4 mana 4/3 with trample is just okay, but I'm very happy to pay 2 mana for a monster roll. So this card, both halves of this card are worth a card. The instant speed is a great trick. We saw a lot of like Garenbrig Carver in the last set was 2 mana instant +2/+2, and it was a 3/2 on the back half. And that card was a huge overperformer. But even just giving a creature trample at instant speed is great in this set. Like there are so many like 1/1 humans. Your opponent will block your 5/5 with a 1/1 human or a 2/2 knight, and you'll be able to put a monster roll on it for a bunch of extra damage. Or they'll just block your 2/2 with their 2/2, and you'll put a monster roll on it and win the combat, and then still have a 4/3. Very efficient green staple. Garruk's Uprising. This is a build around. It's really good because you do need to be able to trigger that first ability. You want it to draw a card when it comes into play, and the trample is relevant. It's less relevant in this set than it would be in others because of the monster roll. But if this draws you 2 cards, it's fine. If it draws you 4 cards, you're extremely happy. It's hard to get more cards than that. But it's not a terrible late game draw like a lot of these effects, because if you top deck in the late game, it still replaces itself right away. Yeah, this is a good build around. Oh, I should have the YouTube in my comments. One sec. I'm just gonna finish this out with you. All right, up next we've got Gingerbread Hunter. This card is it does everything you want it to do. A 3 mana to give a creature -2/2 will often kill a creature. Sometimes it'll just let you win a combat at instant speed, triggers the cards that cares about instant sorceries. If you have no black sources in your deck, you're still fine playing this as a 5 mana 5/5 make a food. The food is good in this set, and you're a little limited on sources, but you're fine playing this with the Prophetic Prism. There's lots of good, we'll get to them, ways to just randomly produce black mana in green. So like, you don't even have to have a swamp in your deck for Gingerbread Hunter's first half to be a relevant card, and the 5 mana 5/5 is quite strong on the back end. Graceful Takedown. Not a ton to say about this. This ends up being, so we've seen a lot of these, lots of extra text to say that your opponent can't just kill one creature to save their creature, which is good on a sorcery. So chances are this is going to be a 2 mana removal spell as long as you are consistently playing creatures. If you have 1 enchanted creature and 1 normal creature, you're happy. But generally speaking, this is going to be 2 mana destroy a creature, which is good at sorcery speed. Like it's a 5 at sorcery speed. You do need a lot of bigger or just reasonably sized creatures. Like chances are you'll have a 2/2 and a 3/3, and this will deal 5 damage. Like a 2/2 vanilla and then a 2/2 with a monster roll. You'll be able to deal 5 damage with Graceful Take. I also love a graceful takedown in general. Ground Seal. 2 mana to cantrip on your enchantment is fine. This is not quite as good as Spreading Seas because there's a very good chance that you hurt yourself with it as well. But it's worth having access to out of the sideboard because there are good black recursive cards. Let me find some. There's bad black recursive cards that people will still play, and then there's quite good black recursive cards in general. Well, Fell Horseman's a bad one. Looking for the Back for Seconds. Back for Seconds is a great card. If your opponent has 2 of them and they're trying to outgrind you, bring in your Ground Seal. It replaces itself. It's an enchantment that sits in play. You usually want your enchantments to be able to die to be strong, but this is a good sideboard card. And if you have enough cards that care about enchantments at rare, go ahead and play it anyway. It's not the end of the world if you draw it and it replaces itself without a major effect. Just make sure you don't have any recursion that you're turning off. Yes, 1 sec, Black Sheep. I actually just don't do a lot of specific YouTube content. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble finding my YouTube channel. I don't make a lot. But this one is meant to go up on YouTube. All right, so this part 2 is processing now. Would somebody mind linking Black Sheep to the YouTube video part 1 in Discord? All right, Hamlet Glutton. So you see me talk about the 6 mana gain 3, 6 mana gain 4 life in other sets. And what I like so much about these cards is these expensive. So this is average 6 mana, 6/6, trample, gain 3 life. Fine finisher, nothing super special. You want to be able to bargain it. It's okay if you can't. Exactly, Kuro. The thing that I like about these specific effects, so like if this were just a 6 mana, even a 6 mana 7/7 or 6 mana 8/8, I wouldn't like it as much without the gain 3 life. And that's because often what will happen is you'll play this card and your opponent will still be about to kill you in the air or burn you out on turn 5 or turn 6. But you can really ramp this out. Like you can put this out on turn 3 or 4 in a lot of games. As long as it's a significant amount of resources to do so. But it's fine then, and it's fine just playing for 7 mana to gain 3 life to keep you alive a little bit longer. Like you don't pick it that high, but you need a little bit of top end, and this is some good top end. Yeah, so I gave it a 4 with a ceiling of 5. That ceiling of 5 is if you're ramping it out aggressively. In general, a lot of the blue-green decks, you're going to have to choose between the cards that you ramp into and the cards that do the ramping. Though the cards that like make mana, get lands, and let you play faster, you'll pick, and then you'll end up with weaker 6 and 7 drops because they come later. And Hamlet Glutton is a good pickup afterwards. So if you are focusing on the ramp aspect and you're making a lot of treasures, then you want the Hamlet Glutton. Like you can think of Hamlet Glutton as a 7 mana 6/6, but your treasure can make 2 mana for it. Tashimi, I talked about it in the first one. Oh, thank you so much, Herix. I talked about it in the first one, but it's something that I do special here. So I do things on a rating system, and then the floor is the worst a card will be. The ceiling is the best a card will be. And then the effort is how difficult it is to bring you from the floor to the ceiling. So in Ground Seal, you tend to need rares or specific situations in order to bring it up from that floor of a 2. So that has a high effort value. But our next card, I skipped one. So this Howling Gale thing, this is always going to be a good card. So it has a low effort value. This Hollow Scavenger is a 3 mana 3/2. You can send it on an adventure to make a food. It's basically free, and then you can grow it. If this is a 3 mana 3/2 that grows exactly 1 time, that's a 4. It's usually going to play like a 4. If you're in a dedicated food deck where you can activate the Hollow Scavenger a lot, that's a 6. But it's a reasonable amount of effort. So in any given green deck, this is going to have a value of a 4. And in the food deck specifically, that value is going to be a 6. So I gave it medium effort. I can help you later, Tashimi. Yeah, hopefully that helped. All right, Howling Galefang. 4 mana, 4/4 with Vigilance, that's a 4. 4 mana with 4/4 and Vigilance and Haste, that's a 5. Pretty straightforward, little bit of effort. All you need is 1 Adventure. If you sent 1 card before turn 4 on Adventure, then this attack is a 4/4 Vigilant Haste Beast. Quite strong. So yeah, 5 is a good card. 4 is above filler level, but only like 4 is like, your deck will be mostly 4s ideally. And so your job is to design a deck that brings cards to the certain level. So like Howling Galefang is a very easy card to play at a 4 or a 5. Up next we have Leaving Ambush. This one is getting a revisit. I think this card is very good. Untap Reach is great. +3 tends to dodge a lot of this set's removal spell. So this is, you have a limit on how many tricks you can fit into your deck. They take up removal spells slots, but you need a certain amount. This one is an honorable removal spell, because if you have a 4/4 and they have a 4/4 and your 4/4 is tapped, then you get to Leaping Ambush in order to block. And this is not included in the rating, but as a corner case, all the white and blue cards trigger when you tap an untapped creature. You can untap your opponent's creature in order to tap it again. It'll happen at least once, I'm sure. Just a cool card, diminishing returns, and it clashes with some of the other pump spells. That's enough of a reason to bring it down to. I like this card. It replaces removal where you need it to, but there are really good 1 mana interaction pieces. That's the only reason this would be a 4 in a normal set, I think. Galefang is really cool. Also, I love, like, just a cool beast. It is Howling. All right, up next we have Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. Now this, so Tashimi, this is a build around, because in general, this is like, if you aren't a food deck, this is going to just be a 2. If you are a dedicated food deck, this is going to be a 7 because it wins you the game. 4 mana to make a food and a mana rock is not great, but turning every food you have into a mana rock is so powerful. If this doubles your mana, it probably wins you the game, which means if you have 3 food in play when you play the Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, then this is a free card. So if you have 3 food in play and you play Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, then you just spent 4 mana and you still have 4 mana. So you do want this to be a dedicated food card, but in the dedicated food deck, this is probably the best green card for you. Like, if all of your creatures are just efficiently making food when they come into play, there's a lot of creatures like, this is a 5 mana 5/5, make a food. And then you then you play the Knight of Sweet's Revenge. Your opponent now has to kill you, because you can grow all your team 4, 5, 6 power. And if you have a bunch of food in play, you will have 11, like if you have 6 food, it's not out of the realm of possibility for you to have 11 mana the turn you play Knight of the Sweet's Revenge. So if you have 6 food, then you can play this, tap all your food, give everything +7/+7 this turn. It does not grant trample, it's not free, but there are enough monster rolls in green-black food that you will have, enough of your creatures will have trample to make this a lethal card often. It's very cool. That's a very good point, Kuro, because even if it only makes 1 food, it still grows. So we're gonna raise the floor a little. Thank you. All right, up next we've got Red-Tooth Genealogist. 3 mana, 2/3 that makes a royal roll. It can't attach the roll to itself, but if you have one other creature, this is 3 mana for a 3/4 worth of stats. That floor of a 3 is only if you don't have another creature, which is possible on turn 3 in green. It's also a little awkward in that it's 3 mana and there's a lot of 2 mana acceleration in green, but in general, this card is really good. Ward 1 is a relevant ability, +1/+1 is a relevant ability. Yeah, this card does what you need it to do, and it's a very efficient green card. The floor might be a little low, but we'll revisit that. Red-Tooth Vanguard, I love this card. You made a 3-1 with trample, like there is a definite green aggressive deck available. This is one of the staples of that deck. It is, so like if you have 3 Red-Tooth Vanguards, it triggers when an enchantment comes into play. Most of the cards in the set trigger when an enchantment leaves play. Red-Tooth Vanguard triggers when it comes in. So 3 Red-Tooth Vanguards means that Ground Seal is suddenly a fine card in the late game, because you can cast it, draw a card, pick up 2 Red-Tooth Vanguards. It is a little expensive, but it's expensive after being a 3/1 trample that wields rolls. It is like you can put a young hero roll in this and it'll be a 4/2, then a 5/3. You can put, I mean, even just putting a wicked roll on it and making it a 4/2 trampler is so good. But in a normal set, you have to build a little bit for the Red Tooth Vanguard. In this set, there are 29 cards that just make a roll for free. This card is so cool. I think it's gonna be a big performer in this set. I'll take it pretty high. It's also, a lot of the green cards care about having 4 power, so having a creature that is really easy to get to 4 power on 2 mana that your opponent doesn't want to spend a removal spell on is just a good thing to have access to. Up next, we have Returned from the Wilds. This is a cool, really well-designed card. So out of basic land, human, food, you will always get what you need out of this card. And what the power here is the flexibility. You don't want a ton of these because you don't, like 3 mana for a 1/1 that makes a food is not good enough. 3 mana for a 1/1 that goes to get a land tap is not good enough. 3 mana for gain 3 life, go get a basic land is not good enough. But the ability to choose any combination of those two makes the card solid all around. So like, and it kind of does, like you will get a bargain fodder and a food, or you will get a food that you need for your other food cards and some ramp. This card is solid, but has diminishing returns. You don't want too many of them. There's better ramp, but like you'll play this. Good fixing. I think this is just a fantastic design. That is a good point, Kuro. There's not a lot. So like there are 1/1 humans, but there are not as many 1/1 blockers as there have been in other sets because of the rats. All right, up next we have Root Rider Fawn. Now this is the ramp you want. It is efficient, it blocks, it filters your mana. So like the green deck, because it also has Prophetic Prism and Crystal Grotto, gets to run so many of these like Gingerbread Hunters for free. This is a 5 mana 5/5 that makes a food, but because of your 2 mana creature, you get to play this card front half, even if your deck has no swamps. It's good. It wears rolls well, it blocks well, it filters your mana, it ramps you. This card does everything. The only downside is having too many rocks. But like if you have a big pile of Root Rider Fawns in your food deck and you play your Knight of Sweet's Revenge, you're gonna be happy that all of your lands can attack. This is a high power green card. I'm gonna be taking it pretty high. And like that filtering is relevant. Like we've seen 2 mana 1/3 mana dorks perform really well and limited in the past, and the filter is just a little extra bonus. That ceiling is because you're ramping. Like you'll usually play it at a 5 because you'll ramp. The 4 drops are very strong in this deck or in this format. But even if you're just playing a 3 mana card of another color, you're not too upset. And being able to block the 2/2s on the other side of the table. Royal Treatment. This is just efficient. So 1 mana, put a counter on a creature, it gains hexproof. That is good enough. 1 mana, put a counter on target creature, it gains hexproof. Also, you can bargain it away. Also, it has ward 1. Also, it triggers celebration. Also, it triggers all of your cards that care about enchantments coming into play or dying. For 1 mana, like this card is a premier trick. It gets better the better your creatures are. The more cards that you care about protecting, the more cards that you like. Even if you're just protecting your signpost uncommons, it's very solid. This is often 1 mana and it's going to be worth 2 cards. I like this one. Season of Growth. So I started this one at a 3 and a 4, and then I upped it to a 4 and a 5, and then I upped it to a 6. And that's because in addition to so Season of Growth is a card we've seen in the past. It turns every card like Royal Treatment into a cantrip, and even if you play it on an empty board, you can still play creatures to scry. So in a normal set, you're happy to play a Season of Growth because it means that your only bad draws for the rest of the game are lands, and you're less likely to hit them because your creatures scry your lands away, and your spells tend to draw cards. Most of the green removal spells are bites, which means that you kill your opponent's creature and draw a card. And out of the 29 cards that make rolls, 20 of them are just spells that target creatures. So like even your where'd that 4 drop go that makes a monster? So your Ferocious Werefox. Well, with the Season of Growth, this isn't just a 6 mana 5/4 trample. This is a 6 mana draw a card, scry 1 5/4 trample. Season of Growth is less of a build around than the other ones because you're so much more like a lot of the Enchanted Tales have these build around type mechanics. Season of Growth just is good enough. You will likely, even if you open it in pack 3, have enough cards to make this card powerful. If you can get 2 cards in a scry off of Season of Growth, well, that's worth it. There's a very good chance you will get 6 scry and 4 cards over the course of the game, even if you draw it in the late game. Green engines are incredibly powerful in this. They are all so much, so every color has good cards to build around at uncommon and good engines to generate card advantages at uncommon. Greens are the easiest to turn on. So I think that means that green is the best mid-range deck. You just have the option of pivoting on between control and aggro so well, and you block really well. Green might be, like, green is the best at drawing cards, and there's really good card drawing. Skybeast Tracker, 4 mana 2/4 with reach is good enough. Like, it's not great. The problem is that you need other ways. There are better 4-drops, and this doesn't attack well. It is a great, powerful defensive card. So I gave it a 3, and it's usually gonna play like a 3. But if you are trying to stall the game out so that your Season of Growth will draw you cards, or so that you can play huge, big game creatures in the late game, then this card is fine. You'll also end up splashing the Skybeast Tracker in like a red-white deck without blockers that is trying to pivot into something more late game because your opponent's blue-black flying tempo deck is just trashing you. But if this card it's hard to make this card better than a 2/4 reach, but if you can make, 3 food out of it, you're pretty happy. I will not often play this, but there are a lot of matchups where I'll want access to it out of the sideboard, either because my opponent is a mid-range deck and they're slow enough that I have time to make the food matter, or because I'm ramping it out. If you can play this on turn 3, it's a lot better, but overall, it's just kind of a filler 4-drop, which is sad because it's a really push giant spider. Up next, Spider Food. This is a card I will usually play the first copy of, and that's it. And that's because you need a certain amount of removal, and you want to be able to kill enchantments in this set. But you don't want to have to dedicate a whole slot just to killing enchantments. You want your enchantment kills to be incidental or something that you can adjust for, not something that takes a whole card. Same with killing flyers, same with destroying an artifact, but the food is a nice bonus. So like in the black-green food deck, I will likely play the first copy of this, or if I have other ways to use food, I'll play it. Generally speaking, it is a little weaker than the other removal, but like it's reasonable fill. I gave it a 3, which is playable. Sometimes you will need access to it, and some decks you need to be able to kill your opponent's cards, but instant speed enchantment removal is significantly better in this set than sorcery speed enchantment removal, because the instant speed enchantment removal will usually have a target in order to win a combat by killing a roll. And killing a roll with spider food and making a food does not feel worth it. You cannot. Oh, yes you can. Destroy up to. You can play this as 3 mana, make a food, but 5 mana for a whole spell to gain 5 life is not worth it. But it is a good fail case, XC. That is a great point. It's not enough to change the rating, but yes, you can play this as just make a food. So you don't want to dedicate a whole card to destroying an enchantment? Well, that's what Stormcloud Vanguard is for. 2 mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment as your adventure. It's like, you don't mind spending that to kill a roll, because a 6 mana 6/7 that's hard to block is pretty strong. The uncommon adventures in this set are great. It's still a little fragile. We're raising it to a 4 because nothing deals 6 damage. 7 toughness is just a lot in this set. Your opponent has to spend a real kill spell on it. You will probably have to tap out for it, but there's a good chance you already got value out of that for a tap. I like this card. You gotta, Kuro, you need to do Poke Shop. And then you type the ball, and then you type however many you want. Up next, and so you get money for the Poke Shop, Kuro, just for hanging out. All right, up next we have Tanglespan Lookout. Now this is a good build around. I actually had it, so I had a lower floor with a higher effort because that tends to be what the build around cards do. But a 3-mana 2/3 is almost good enough, and there are so many free auras. There are 29 cards that just make a roll, and you don't have to cast the aura spell. It just happens. Like this floor of a 4 is going to be a 3-mana 2/3 that later draws a card if your opponent doesn't kill it right away. But like what's going to happen way more often is you'll play this on turn 4, and then your opponent will try and kill it, and you'll be like, well, I'm going to Royal Treatment, draw a card, and it's a 3/4 with ward now. Fuck you. I shouldn't say that in YouTube content. But this card is so powerful in this set. I'll be first picking it a lot because so an 8 as a value generally means it's probably generating enough value to win you the game. You can get this up to an 8 if you just take enchantments, but what you really want for the Tanglespan Lookout to be strong is protection. If you keep this alive for a few turns and your cards that keep it alive also draw you cards, it wins this game. This card is so good, Kuro. Like, just wow. Like, this will play like I'm gonna first pick this card a lot because it plays like an 8 if you first pick it. So the comparison card for Tanglespan Lookout is Ashiok's Reaper. So you can kind of see the differences between comes into play and leaves play, and 3 mana versus 4 mana in their values. It's worth a whole point difference. It is much easier to use, but they have the same ceiling. But they are kind of counterparts. This is this is a strong green card in general, and in the right deck, it is the strongest green. And that's not necessarily any given archetype. All the colors make rolls pretty well. All the colors have enchantments lying around. So it's more about deck building and draft navigation than specific colors or archetype. Great card though. Tempest Heart. I like this card a lot. This is what you want in your mana value 5 or greater deck. If this is this adventure is very clearly worth a card. 2 mana, draw a card. You draw 2 and discard. Oh, it's draw 2, discard 2, not draw 2. I thought this was draw 2, discard 1. We are lowering the floor to a 4. Yeah, because this does not generate a whole card. It's just card selection, and this is going to be a 4 mana 3/4 that turns into a 4/5 the next turn, which is good, not great. Sorry about that. We're lowering the general value to a 4, but it's still a fine card. You don't necessarily need to scan the clouds for this to be a good second part, but like, that's so disappointing because I was really excited to duplicate this spell because there's a blue card that duplicates adventures, but yeah, you can't, this doesn't net you a card. I would rather pay 3 mana to draw 2 cards, discard 1 card, than draw 2, discard 2. But it also doesn't trigger a lot of stuff, but it's still a fine card. Like, it's usually gonna play like this 4. I'm lowering the floor a little bit, but because if you have no ways to grow it, if you have no follow-up to grow it, you're not happy with it. So disappointing. I thought this was a strict 2 for 1 with the front and the back, but the selection is still valuable. Like, it's still a useful card, and the selection means that you are more likely to have a 5-drop on the turn after it, but that card selection takes time and doesn't generate, like, what's valuable about all of these other multicolored adventure cards is the ability to play them early for value and then play them as a relevant body later on. All right, up next we've got the Territorial Witch Stalker. So this card is just good in this set. A 2 mana 2/3 blocks just about everything, and it counts itself for power 4 or greater, which means that if you give it a +2/+2, then it can't trigger off of just 1 roll because it's a 2/3. But if you give it one of the +2/+2 auras, it does attack on its own. It's sort of, you have to build around it a bit. So that floor of a 3, that's if it's a 2/3 that is not likely to attack on turn 3 or turn 4. But just if it attacks on turn 3 or turn 4, then it's a 2 mana 3/3 attacker, and you're very happy to have it. If you have to cast the adventure to get, so you have to cast the adventure to send it on an adventure. The idea is that you are sending this creature on a journey. So if you discard it or put it into play, it doesn't go on the journey and you don't get the bonus. So like you do have to pay the cost for the adventure. That's why there's a little extra build cost to having a 2-color adventure. But it's cool. Like, Scan the Clouds is relevant in the blue-red spells deck because putting 2 instant sorceries into your graveyard at instant speed is nice. But it is still card selection. So, like, one way to think about Adventures XC is this effect has draw a card attached to it, and you always draw this card. So this is actually draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards, but one of them will always be a 3/4 that grows. So it just helps you. It helps when you think about it to evaluate it that way. Like, and it makes it really obvious for something like Gingerbread Hunter. 3 mana, target creature gets -2/2 until end of turn. Draw a card. Like, you'd play that in every single black deck, even though the card you draw is always a 5 mana 5/5. So cool. This card's really good. I'll be talking about this a lot, this format. All right, up next we have Titanic Growth. In general, it's best to relate combat tricks in relation to one another. Titanic Growth is not as good as the other combat tricks in all situations except in the head-to-head. It beats every combat trick in response to that combat trick. Just about, not literally. But most combat tricks lose in the head-to-head with Titanic Growth. I still don't want to play this in a vacuum. There are very aggressive decks that want this if you have enough trampling creatures. If you have low removal, this does a good job of pretending to be a removal spell. And if you have double strikers, 8 extra damage is a lot more than 4 extra damage. But 2 mana is a lot to hold up. Like, there's a world of difference between a 2 mana combat trick and a 1 mana combat trick. But it's not totally unplayable. That's fine. It's fine at a 2. I'm lowering the effort value. Yeah. So it's a fine card. It's not something you're excited to play. Up next, Toadstool Admirer. So I changed my opinion a lot on this card. It's not great, but there is going to be an aggressive rolls deck. And being able to safely put a roll on Toadstool Admirer on turn 2 is really good. It's also a fantastic royal creature because Ward 3 buys you a whole extra turn. And a lot of the cheap spells, so like these kind of cards, like if I play a Gingerbrute on turn 1 and then on turn 2 put a roll on it, you're going to kill it in response. But you can't do that with the Toadstool Admirer because it has Ward 2. And if I can get to turn 4 with a roll on it, then you can't shock my Toadstool Admirer because I'll respond by putting a counter on it. So it's not like it's still just a filler card, but it's not unplayable. It is a build around to an extent, but even if you build around it a lot, it's still just going to be a 4, which is slightly above average. Tough Cookie. This is, so if you put a Young Hero roll on a Gingerbrute, it becomes a Tough Cookie. Not quite. But the card's really good. Like, a 2 mana 2/2 that makes a food is good enough. Like, if that were all this card did, then that would be fine. But it's a 2 mana 2/2 that makes it so that your opponent can't kill you right now because you play it, then you eat the food, and then you can block with the Tough Cookie and eat the food. It also sacrifices to other food synergies. And if you play this on turn 2, make a 2/2 without a 3-drop, well, next turn you attack for 6. Because you can turn the food it just made into a 4/4. And a 2 mana 2/2 that attacks for 6 on turn 3 is very hard to race, even if that's all you're doing for the next few turns. Like, that's a 4-turn clock that starts on turn 2. This card is really good. It's not legendary. It stacks. First pick it if you want to be the food deck. It's not hard to play with, and it's like that floor of a 5. That's a 2/2 that makes a food and nothing else. Very good card all around. All right, last few. Troublemaker Oof. 2 mana 2/2 is fine. It blocks. It does what you want it to do. The ability to bargain away an extra permanent to exile. Like, this is the kind of disenchant effect you want access to. Being able to kill your opponent's Garruk's Uprising or Raid Bombardment, even if you have to sacrifice a real threat, will save the game sometimes. And as a 2 mana 2/2, you're pretty happy with it. Generally speaking, you want to have things to bargain with it before you play it and get to that ceiling of a 5. But we've seen cards like this perform pretty well, like Reclamation Sage, Mass Changeling in the enchantment sets. You're pretty happy to have. Up the Beanstalk. This card is just good. It's all around good. If you are building around it, it'll draw you a bunch of cards over the course of the game. But your worst case scenario of a 2-mana enchantment that draws you a card and triggers your enchantment synergies and is bargain, like that fail case of a cantrip that bargains is high. And there's a very good chance that some amount of cards in your deck have mana value 5 or greater. So you can play this, draw a card, and then draw another card or two, and then bargain it away. Like, this is a great value machine. Floor of 4 is usually going to play slightly above that floor, and in the dedicated mana value deck, you'll draw 6 cards off of this and win the game. Utopia Sprawl. Hey, you know that they print Llanowar Elves and Birds of Paradise that your opponent can't Lightning Bolt. This card is better than Llanowar Elves and Birds of Paradise unless it's about to attack, unless you're trying to attack or grow the creatures. Like if you're trying to use the food overrun to kill them, then this card is worse. That's it. That's the only time that this card is worse. Because this is a free spell. You can play this for a green mana on an untapped land and then tap that land and you will have spent no mana, but you will still be up a mana on the following turn. Or you can play this on turn 1 and play a 3-drop on turn 2. This is about as good as ramp gets. You can play a Utopia Sprawl in place of your 17th land, but if you have 2 Utopia Sprawls, you still want 16 lands. If you have 3 Utopia Sprawls, you can play 15 lands, but only if you are like base green. You still need at least 9 forests. So notice that all the notes I just gave you are not reasons not to play Utopia Sprawl. You still want to play Utopia Sprawl. That's just how. This card is fantastic. It also fixes your mana. Like, it does everything. This card was $6, even though it was printed at common. And now it's going to be $1, and everybody can play with Utopia Sprawl in every single commander deck now. Burden Outrider. 3-mana 4/2s have been weak in the past because they trade down. Like, your 3-mana 4/2 will trade with your opponent's 2-drop, your opponent's random oof, your opponent's tough cookie that already made a food, your opponent's Toadstool Admire with a roll. That's a bad example. But the ability to activate this is solid. You only want this in a deck that, yeah, you can activate this so that it doesn't trade down. And you only want this in a deck that actively cares about you having 4 power creatures. But it's good in that deck. It's very good in the deck that you cares about having 4 power creatures. It's not a high pick, but you'll pick it up late and play it at that 4. If you don't have that, it's gonna play like a 2. So be very careful with it. It's just a fragile 3-drop. Welcome to Sweet Tooth. Just a huge army in a can. Like, this is a lot of value. So the fail case on this is a 2-mana 1/1 that made a food and becomes a 2/2. So like, this is at worst a 2-mana 2/2, but usually it's going to play like you make a 2-mana 1/1. You play it on turn 2. If you play this on turn 2, then make a food and play a 3-drop that makes a food, then you have a 3/3. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a 2-mana 3/3. It's X plus +1 counters, where X is 1 plus the number of food. So even if you have to eat that food in an emergency, it will still put all the counters on it. And it's 2 permanents to bargain, plus the food. Like, these value sagas are just so good. But yeah, make 2 permanents to bargain away and significantly grow a creature is great. I love this card, it's really powerful. I like that it's a cake. Like, somebody baked a cake to welcome you to Sweet Tooth, and you eat it in layers. The first layer brings the human, and the second layer is your food, and the third layer powers you up. So cool. The only saga that I think they missed on was the red one, and it's still a cool saga, it's just bad. The other 4 are all great. The white one's harder to work with. All right, so that is it for today's set review. What's going to happen now is I'm going to turn off the stream for 2 minutes, change the title, and we are going to get right into early access. See you in just a minute. I'm